Imagine creating one of the most innovative companies in the world. Imagine turning a small garage project into a business worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Now imagine being told that you no longer have control over the company you built. It sounds unbelievable, but in 1985, Steve Jobs lost control of Apple, the company he co-founded. Many people say he was simply fired. The truth is more complicated. It involved ambition, personality clashes, business pressure, and one of the most famous boardroom conflicts in technology history. Ironically, the same company that pushed him aside would later ask him to return and help save it. So how did it happen? This is the hidden chapter behind one of the greatest comeback stories in business. Chapter 1. The Garage Dream. In 1976, personal computers were still unfamiliar to most people. Computers were large, expensive, and mainly used by businesses and universities. Two young men believed that could change. Steve Wozniak was a gifted engineer. Steve Jobs was a visionary who understood how technology could become something ordinary people would want to use. Together, they founded Apple Computer. Working from a family garage, they built the Apple I. It wasn't flashy, but it proved they had something special. Soon after came the Apple II. Unlike many computers of its time, it was practical, user-friendly, and successful. Sales grew quickly. Investors became interested. Apple transformed from a small startup into one of America's fastest-growing technology companies. In 1980, Apple went public. The public offering made headlines and created hundreds of millionaires overnight. Steve Jobs was only 25 years old. To many people, he looked unstoppable. But rapid success often creates new challenges. As Apple expanded, running the company became more complicated. Designing revolutionary products was one thing. Managing thousands of employees and satisfying investors was something entirely different. Jobs knew Apple needed experienced leadership. That decision led him to someone who would forever change his life. Chapter 2. The Man from Pepsi. Steve Jobs wanted a leader who understood how to run a large company. His search eventually brought him to John Sculley, then president of PepsiCo. At first, Sculley had little interest in leaving. He already held one of the most prestigious jobs in corporate America. Jobs decided to make one final attempt. He asked a question that would become legendary. Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world? The challenge worked. Sculley accepted. Initially, the partnership seemed ideal. Jobs admired Sculley's business experience. Sculley admired Jobs' creativity and vision. Both believed they could build Apple into one of the world's greatest companies. But beneath the excitement, they had very different leadership styles. Jobs moved fast. He demanded perfection. He often challenged employees to achieve what seemed impossible. Many found him inspiring. Others found him difficult to work with. As Apple continued growing, these differences became harder to ignore. Chapter 3. The Macintosh Gamble. Steve Jobs placed enormous faith in one product, the Macintosh. He believed it would transform personal computing. The Macintosh introduced ideas that would later become standard in computers, including a graphical interface and a mouse. Technologically, it was groundbreaking. Commercially, the situation was more complicated. The computer received attention, but sales did not immediately meet Apple's expectations. The company had invested heavily. Investors wanted results. Inside Apple, executives began questioning whether Jobs was making the right decisions. The disagreements became more frequent. The relationship between Jobs and Sculley slowly changed from cooperation to conflict. Eventually, both men believed they should lead Apple's future. Only one could. Chapter 4. The Boardroom Showdown. By 1985, the tension inside Apple had reached its breaking point. Steve Jobs still believed he was the right person to lead the Macintosh division. John Sculley believed Apple needed stability instead of constant conflict. Executives were forced to choose between the company's visionary founder and the experienced executive they had hired to manage it. The conflict became impossible to hide. According to accounts from the time, Jobs tried to regain control while Sculley was preparing for a business trip. When Sculley learned of the plan, he confronted the situation directly, and the issue was brought before Apple's board of directors. The board sided with Sculley. It wasn't because they thought Jobs lacked talent. They believed Apple needed predictable leadership and that Jobs' management style had become too disruptive. For Steve Jobs, it was devastating. Just 9 years after helping create Apple, he no longer had real authority within the company. A few months later, he resigned. The man who had built Apple walked out of its doors. Chapter 5. Starting again. Many people believed Steve Jobs' career was over, but failure became the beginning of something new. He founded a company called Next. Next computers weren't huge commercial successes, but they introduced advanced ideas that would later influence modern computing. Around the same time, Jobs purchased a small computer graphics company from Lucasfilm. That company was called Pixar. At first, Pixar struggled financially. Years later, everything changed. In 1995, Pixar released Toy Story, the world's first fully computer-animated feature film. It became a global success. Steve Jobs suddenly found himself leading one of the most exciting animation studios in the world. Ironically, while Apple was struggling, Jobs was quietly building the experience that would make him an even better leader. Chapter 6. Apple's biggest mistake. During the 1990s, Apple began losing its direction. The company released too many confusing products. Competition from Microsoft grew stronger. Profits declined. Many questioned whether Apple could survive. In 1996, Apple made an unexpected decision. It bought Next. The deal wasn't just about software. It brought Steve Jobs back. At first, he served as an advisor. Then, in 1997, he became Apple's interim CEO. This time, he returned with a very different mindset. He simplified Apple's product line. He focused on quality over quantity. He demanded clarity. One by one, Apple introduced products that changed entire industries. The iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad. The company that had once pushed Steve Jobs aside became one of the most valuable businesses in history under his leadership. Conclusion. Steve Jobs wasn't simply fired. The truth is more complicated. He lost power because the board believed Apple needed a different kind of leadership. Whether that decision was right or wrong remains one of the biggest debates in business history. What is certain is this. Without leaving Apple, there might never have been Next. Without Next, Apple may never have regained its footing. Without Pixar, the animation industry would look very different. Sometimes the chapter that feels like the end becomes the beginning of something even greater. Steve Jobs' story reminds us that failure doesn't always close the book. Sometimes, it writes the most important chapter. Outro. If you enjoyed discovering the hidden story behind Steve Jobs, subscribe to the Hidden Chapters. Every week, we uncover the untold